Mr. Spencer, you spent nearly 6 years covering this national case. Talk to us, how do you feel defending one of the deadliest mass shooters in America?
Well, I have a moral and ethical and legal obligation as a lawyer, once I get appointed on a case, to provide zealous representation. So if you're asking me how do I feel about representing a mass murder, that's part of my ethical and legal obligations. If you're asking me how do I feel about someone that came to our community, being Hispanic, my wife being from Juarez, how did that impact me? Well, it did. It was difficult emotionally at first. I wasn't sure I could actually do it. But getting into the weeds of the case, so to speak, and getting his history and being able to visit with him, I got a different perspective. I will tell you that when I first got appointed, within a day or two after the shooting, and I went to go see him, the only thing I knew about the case was what was in the media, and what was in his manifesto. Right. So I thought, okay, well, this is going to be simple. He's not going to want me to represent him, me being Hispanic. So when I went to go see him, I introduced myself. I said, Patrick, my name is Joe Spencer. I've been appointed to represent you. I want to give you full disclosure, though. Mm-hmm. Although my last name is Spencer, my ass is 100% brown. I'm Hispanic. Do you have a problem with that? He looked at me and he goes, I'm not a racist. I don't have a problem with that. Mm. And then he looks at me and he says, and why do I need a lawyer? I'm guilty. I want to plead guilty. Mm-hmm. I said, well, Patrick, they're contemplating doing the death penalty. You can't plead to the death penalty. But I'm guilty. I'm ready to plead guilty. I said, no, it doesn't work that way. And at the arraignment, we had trouble with him understanding you've got to plead not guilty at the arraignment. This is a process that we have to go through. He was ready to plead guilty from day one. Mm-hmm. Just the system does not allow us to plead guilty to the death penalty, and I would not have pled him to the death penalty. We would have had to have litigated this case.
So even, and I know you mentioned this with our reporter, Lauren Bly, exactly the same statement verbatim. You still stand by the fact that you believe, even after reading the manifesto, he's not racist?
Oh, absolutely. The manifesto was not something that came from him. You have to understand that he is severely mentally ill. He is psychotic. He has been diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. He has been visited by 8 different mental health professionals that have all come to that conclusion. Even the government's own expert on the federal side, who the government always goes to for their death penalty cases, was one of our experts that agreed with that. So, and we got the discovery. We had the ability to get what the federal government seized, his computer. So we were able to see from the download of the forensic analysis they did of what was he doing on the computer. And we saw how he began to deteriorate slowly, starting in December of 2018 up until August 3rd when he came to El Paso.
You mentioned a very important point here with mental health. Combing through studies, Columbia University published an article on shootings and mental health, which states the reality of people with mental health issues account for a very small proportions of mass shootings. And we do have you, Mr. Spencer, on the record Monday saying, with Judge Medrano asking you, quote, is your client legally competent to enter this plea? Which you've returned that and saying, quote, we believe he's competent to proceed. So what is it? Is he competent or is he not?
We're talking about 2 different issues. There's a difference between competence and insanity, okay? Mm-hmm. So if you're asking me, was he competent to proceed? Absolutely, he was competent. It's a very low standard in Texas for competency. Does he know the role of a judge? Does he know the role of a defense lawyer? Does he know the role of the prosecutor? If he can answer those questions, he's competent for the most part. If he can assist the defense in his defense. So competency is very different from insanity or having mental illness. So to answer your question, was he competent? Absolutely, he's competent.
And what's your response with, I come through multiple studies that have taken years to analyze our mass shootings problem in the United States. What's your response with, they're not finding a strong correlation with mental health issues like psychosis, schizophrenia, everything that you just mentioned with mass shootings and murders?
Well, schizoaffective disorder is different from schizophrenia. Schizoaffective disorder is a combination of being having schizophrenia and being bipolar. And what we did, I agree with you. And I can't tell you about the other people. I can tell you what happened in Patrick's case. And I can tell you how he was radicalized. And I can tell you what the evidence showed of what occurred. In December of 2018, when his family noticed him withdrawing a lot more and he started deteriorating much more than he had been in the past, he goes in January, he's working at the Cinemark in January of 2019, and he goes to his employer and he tells him, I'm going to quit. Why are you going to quit, Patrick? Because I'm getting violent thoughts in my head. I'm getting thoughts of hurting my coworkers, and I don't like them, and I don't want to be here. He tells his family the same thing. He tells his professors the same thing. We have what we call 23 minutes of desperation that Patrick went through. When the FBI seized his computer and did the forensic analysis, you were able to go what he Googled on. And in April of 2019, he Googles, how do I get rid of homicidal thoughts? Are violent thoughts normal? Is it normal to have homicidal thoughts and harming other people? He's Googling on the internet these questions. How do I get treated for mental health if I don't have health insurance? So he's crying out for help somehow. He tells his family about the violent thoughts. They send him to a psychiatrist. He sees a psychiatrist in Dallas, Texas, and she records in her notes about he's having violent thoughts. He's having all of this information. We know from the FBI's analysis that he's getting on these extremely right 8chan and 4chan channels that he becomes radicalized on. You know, he never had a friend, never had a girlfriend. He lived on that internet. When you have a broken brain and you have this ideology that is so hurtful and it's pounded into his brain, then you have a president that at a rally says we need to stop the Hispanic invasion, and there's a question of how do you stop the Hispanic invasion? Well, you shoot him.
I'm going to stop you there because we're getting into a different realm here, but let's talk about, I can definitely tell that you've built a relationship with Crusius over the 6 years. It's inevitable, right? You're with this person, building a case with him. Talk to us. Do you believe, after impacting all these, the impact statements, seeing that we spent 48 hours combing through, do you believe justice was served?
Do I think justice was served for Patrick? Yes. Do I think justice was served for the El Paso community? Yes. This community needed judicial finality. We would have never had it for decades and decades and decades based on everything that happened on this case. Do I think the justice was served to those victims that wanted the death penalty? That's a question for them, right? I am morally, religiously, philosophically opposed to the death penalty. I do not believe that the United States should be in the company of Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Red China, North Korea as the countries that have the death penalty. Do we believe in that type of philosophy and human rights that those countries believe in? That's what the death penalty is about. So he's never going to leave prison other than in a coffin, but it'll be under God's time as opposed to man's time. So do I believe justice was served at the end of this case? I do.
You mentioned two religious key aspects here. I think you clearly see you carry your religion here on your wrist as well. Just with what you've heard and what you've processed talking to Crusius, that connection that you've built with him, what is your message to the victims' families and the victims at this time?
It is unbelievable not unbelievable, it is heartfelt condolences that we have, first of all, for all the suffering and the hurt that they had. But to see the type of compassion, the type of love that was expressed in the courtroom by many of the victims is a testament to who El Paso is as a community. You know, the judge said it very well when he told Patrick, you didn't divide us, you didn't separate, you united us. And we all saw the El Paso community come together after August 3rd of 2019. So my message to the community is, I'm glad we brought judicial finality. I hope this is the start of the healing process. I will never use the word closure because I don't think that anybody could get closure who's been affected by such a tragedy. But I do believe that it can start the healing process by having judicial finality in this case. They would have never had it if we would have had a trial.
I mean, many critics would also say that it doesn't have to take a shooting to bring people together, because I think you've seen the El Paso community has always been very close-knit. But that's just some statements that we've received through some of our viewers. Looking back with these 6 years, is there anything you would have done differently?
That's a good question. I don't think there would have been anything that I could have done to stop the tragedy that occurred to the victims with the Rosales administration. They were victimized. The victims were victimized.